The cargo bay of the salvage ship Windcatcher hummed with the low vibration of recycling processors as Captain Sarah Chan made her rounds through the latest haul. Twisted metal from a Zolarian freighter, crystal and power cores from a Morthac trader, and the usual collection of personal belongings that somehow survived vacuum exposure better than their owners had hoped. She paused at container 847B, her scanner beeping insistently. The readout showed biological signatures, which was unusual for salvage this far out in the Outer Rim territories. Most organic matter didn't survive the harsh conditions of deep space, especially not after a ship had been drifting for months. "Martinez, get over here," she called to her engineer, a stocky man with grease-stained coveralls who was currently wrestling with a malfunctioning gravity plate. "What's got you spooked, Cap?" Martinez wiped his hands on a rag and ambled over, his magnetic boots clanking against the metal deck plates. "Biosigns in this container. Could be anything from a stowaway to some kind of biological weapon." Sarah kept her distance, one hand resting on her plasma pistol. In 30 years of salvage work, she'd learned that surprises in deep space were rarely pleasant ones. Martinez ran his own scanner over the container, frowning at the results. "Whatever it is, it's small. Maybe 50 pounds, give or take. Heart rate is elevated but steady. Breathing seems normal for something." The container bore markings in at least 6 different alien scripts. Sarah recognized Corbin trade symbols, Centauri shipping codes, and what looked like hegemony quarantine warnings. A metal tag hung from one corner, its surface scratched and worn from repeated handling. "This thing's been passed around more than a bad credit chip," she muttered, trying to decipher the overlapping markings. "Look at all these transfer stamps. Corbin Syndicate, Centauri Commerce Guild, even some hegemony scientific stations. Should we call it in?" Martinez asked, though they both knew the answer. They were 3 weeks out from the nearest civilized system, and their communication array was held together with spare parts and prayer. Sarah made her decision. "We open it. But we do it smart. Get the containment field ready, and break out the hazmat gear." 20 minutes later, both humans stood behind a shimmering energy barrier as the container's locks disengaged with a series of metallic clicks. The lid hissed open, releasing a small cloud of preservation vapor that smelled faintly of ozone and something floral. Inside, curled up on a bed of what looked like synthetic fur, was something that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. It was roughly the size of a large house cat, but there the resemblance to any Earth creature ended. Its body was covered in scales that shifted color like oil on water, currently displaying nervous patterns of deep blue and silver. 6 legs ended in delicate paws with opposable digits, and its head was dominated by 2 large eyes that seemed to hold an almost human intelligence. The creature looked up at them with those impossibly expressive eyes and made a sound that was part purr, part musical trill. Despite every regulation she'd ever learned about first contact with unknown species, Sarah felt her defenses crumble. "Oh, you poor little thing," she whispered. "How long have you been in there?" Martinez was studying his scanner readings with growing amazement. "Cap, this is incredible. The bio readings show signs of malnutrition and stress, but also some kind of adaptive metabolism. It's like this little guy has been putting himself into mini hibernation to survive." The creature tried to stand but stumbled, its legs shaky from confinement. Sarah noticed several empty food containers in the corner of the crate, along with a water dispenser that had run dry days ago. "We need to get it some food and water," she said, her practical nature overriding her caution. "Whatever else this thing is, it's clearly intelligent and suffering. But, Cap, the regulations about unknown biologics can go to hell." Sarah's voice was firm. "I'm not watching anything starve to death on my ship, regulation or no regulation." They carefully transferred the creature to the ship's medical bay, where Sarah's basic veterinary knowledge, earned from years of caring for the various animals that spacers sometimes kept for company, proved surprisingly relevant. The creature accepted water gratefully, its scales brightening to warmer shades of gold and green as it drank. Food proved more challenging. Sarah tried various protein bars, dried fruits, and even some of Martinez's emergency rations. The creature politely sniffed each offering but showed little interest until she presented it with a packet of synthesized meat that had been enriched with various vitamins and minerals. "Smart little guy," Martinez observed as the creature delicately sorted through the food with its nimble paws, eating some pieces while carefully setting others aside. "It knows what it needs." Sarah spent the next several hours researching the container's markings through her ship's limited database. What she found made her increasingly angry. "Listen to this," she said, reading from her display. "According to these transfer records, this poor thing has been bought and sold 17 times in the past 2 years. Started with the Corvins as some kind of exotic pet, then got passed around when it didn't meet their expectations." "What expectations?" Martinez asked while offering the creature a small dish of clean water. "Near as I can tell, they expected it to be more like a traditional pet. You know, obedient, simple, content to just sit around looking pretty." Sarah scrolled through more records, her frown deepening. "But this little guy is too smart for that. Too independent. The Corvins sold it to a Centauri collector who wanted a conversation piece for parties." The creature, meanwhile, had finished eating and was now exploring the medical bay with obvious curiosity. It examined each piece of equipment carefully, its scales shifting to mirror the colors of whatever it was investigating. When it touched the medical scanner, the device activated, displaying the creature's vital signs. "Did it just?" Martinez stared in amazement. "Operate our equipment?" "Yeah, I think it did." Sarah watched as the creature studied the display, its head tilted in what could only be described as thoughtful concentration. "Look at that. It's actually reading the data." The creature turned to look at Sarah, and, for a moment she had the distinct impression it was trying to communicate something important. It touched the scanner again, and this time the display showed not its own vital signs, but rather what appeared to be a historical record of its health over time. "It's showing us its medical history," Sarah breathed. "Look at this. Stress indicators through the roof, signs of repeated trauma from inadequate care environments, and what looks like evidence of deliberate starvation." The pattern was clear and heartbreaking. Each transfer to a new owner had resulted in declining health as species after species tried to force the creature into their preconceived notions of what a pet should be. The Corvins had expected mindless obedience and had withheld food when the creature showed independence. The Centauri had wanted it to perform tricks for their guests and had kept it in isolation when it refused. "The hegemony scientists were the worst," Sarah continued reading. "They classified it as a failed domestication experiment and recommended it be disposed of as biological waste." Martinez was scratching the creature behind what might have been ears, earning a contented purring sound. "I don't understand how anyone could look at this little guy and see waste. Look how gentle it is, how curious and friendly." Sarah had to agree. In just a few hours, the creature had shown more personality and intelligence than most sentient species she'd encountered. It had figured out how to operate their equipment, had demonstrated clear preferences in food and behavior, and had even seemed to understand their concern for its welfare. The problem, she realized, is that everyone who owned it was looking for something it wasn't. The Corvins wanted a mindless decoration. The Centauri wanted a performing animal. The hegemony scientists wanted a predictable test subject. But what is it, really? Martinez asked. Sarah watched as the creature carefully manipulated the medical scanner's controls, apparently trying to access more detailed information about its own physiology. "I think it's exactly what we're seeing. An intelligent, independent being that deserves to be treated with respect." The creature seemed to sense their conversation was about it. It approached Sarah cautiously, its scales now displaying warm patterns of gold and amber. When she extended her hand, it sniffed carefully before allowing her to gently stroke its head. "The question is, what do we do now?" Martinez said. "According to these records, the last owner was a hegemony research station that marked it for disposal. Technically, that makes it salvage, same as the rest of the cargo." Sarah felt a surge of protective anger. "No. Absolutely not. I don't care what the paperwork says. This is a living, thinking being, not cargo." "I agree with you, Cap, but what are our options? We can't just keep it aboard indefinitely. The health inspectors alone would shut us down." The creature had been listening to their conversation with obvious attention. Now it moved to the medical scanner again and began manipulating the controls with increasingly confident movements. After a few minutes, it had somehow accessed the ship's communication system and was displaying what appeared to be star charts. "Is it trying to show us where it came from?" Sarah leaned closer to study the display. The charts were incredibly detailed, showing star systems she didn't recognize and what looked like orbital patterns around several planets. The creature touched a specific point on one of the charts, then looked directly at Sarah. The message was unmistakable: this was home. But, here's the thing, Martinez pointed out, studying the coordinates. This system isn't in any of our databases. It's way out beyond charted space, farther than any known colony or trading post. Sarah felt a growing sense of the magnitude of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just an abandoned pet, it was potentially a first contact situation with an unknown species. A species that had somehow produced individuals intelligent enough to understand complex technology and communicate across language barriers. "We have to take it home," she said finally. "Whatever the risks, whatever the cost. It's the right thing to do." Martinez nodded slowly. "The Windcatcher's not exactly equipped for deep space exploration, but we could probably make it there and back if we're careful about fuel consumption." The creature seemed to understand their decision. Its scales brightened to cheerful shades of green and gold, and it made that musical trilling sound again. Then, it did something that made Sarah's heart melt. It gently touched her hand with one of its delicate paws, in what was unmistakably a gesture of gratitude. "All right, little friend," she said softly. "Let's get you home. But, first, we need to make sure you're healthy enough for the journey." As they worked to prepare for the unexpected detour, Sarah couldn't help but think about the implications of what they discovered. Here was a species apparently intelligent enough to operate complex technology, yet somehow 17 different owners had seen it as nothing more than a failed pet. What did that say about the galactic community's ability to recognize intelligence when it didn't conform to expected patterns? How many other species might be suffering similar fates, dismissed as simple animals because they didn't fit into predetermined categories? The creature had settled down on a pile of clean blankets Martinez had provided, but its large eyes remained alert and watchful. Sarah had the impression it understood far more about their situation than they did about its. "You know what bothers me most about all this," she said to Martinez as they ran final diagnostics on their navigation systems. "Every species that owned this little guy was supposedly advanced, civilized. The Corvins pride themselves on their cultural sophistication. The Centauri claim to be the galaxy's greatest diplomats. The hegemony calls itself the pinnacle of scientific achievement. But none of them bothered to actually communicate with it," Martinez finished. "They just assumed it was a dumb animal and tried to force it into that role." Exactly. Makes you wonder what other assumptions we're making about species we consider lesser than ourselves. The creature had apparently been listening to their conversation. It approached the console where Sarah was working and gently placed one paw on her arm. When she looked down, it was holding something in its other paw, a small device that must have been hidden somewhere in its container. The device was clearly technological but unlike anything in Sarah's experience. It was smooth and organic-looking, more grown than built. When the creature activated it with a touch, it projected a three-dimensional image that made both humans gasp in amazement. The image showed a planet of incredible beauty, with floating cities connected by bridges of living light, gardens that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and beings very much like their small friend moving through landscapes that defied conventional physics. "This is where you're from?" Sarah asked softly. The creature nodded, an unmistakably human gesture that it must have learned from observing them. Then, it touched the device again, and the image changed to show what could only be described as a rescue mission. Ships launched from the beautiful world, searching through space, following trails and signals. "They're looking for you," Martinez realized. "Your people are trying to find you." The creature's scales shifted to sad patterns of blue and gray as it nodded again. Then, it manipulated the device to show one more image, the same rescue ships, but older, more worn, their searches growing more desperate and far-ranging as time passed. "How long have you been gone?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure the creature could understand the concept of time measurement in human terms. The creature held up its paws, manipulating its digits in complex patterns. After a moment, Sarah realized it was trying to use the medical scanner's chronometer to show elapsed time since its capture. The number that appeared on the display made her sick to her stomach. 7 years. This intelligent being had been trapped in various forms of captivity for 7 years, passed from owner to owner like an object, while its people searched desperately for any sign of its fate. "We're taking you home," Sarah said firmly. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes. I promise you that." The creature looked at her for a long moment, its scales shifting through complex patterns of color. Then, it touched her hand again and made a sound that somehow conveyed more gratitude than any words could have expressed. As the windcatcher changed course toward the coordinates the creature had provided, Sarah found herself thinking about the journey ahead. They were heading into uncharted space to return a being whose intelligence had been completely overlooked by multiple advanced civilizations. But, somehow, she felt like this was exactly where they were supposed to be heading. Maybe it was time for humanity to show the galaxy what they were really capable of when it came to recognizing the worth and dignity of other thinking beings. The stars stretched ahead of them, and somewhere among them waited a people who had never given up hope of finding their lost family member. Sarah was determined to make sure that hope wasn't in vain. The journey to the unknown system took 3 weeks, and, during that time, Sarah learned more about their passenger than she'd expected possible without a common language. The creature, whom they'd started calling Scout due to its curious and exploratory nature, proved to be remarkably adaptable and helpful aboard the ship. It quickly figured out the ship's daily routines and began anticipating their needs. When Martinez was working on repairs, Scout would appear with the exact tool he needed before he asked for it. When Sarah was calculating navigation adjustments, Scout would activate nearby displays to show relevant stellar cartography data. Most impressively, Scout had somehow learned to interface directly with the ship's computer systems. Not in a disruptive way, but rather like a new crew member learning their station. Sarah watched in amazement as Scout delicately manipulated control interfaces with its nimble paws, accessing databases and running diagnostics with an intuitive understanding of the ship's systems. It's like watching someone who's never seen a piano before sit down and play a concert, Martinez observed one morning as Scout efficiently rerouted power from non-essential systems to give them better engine efficiency. The question is, how? Sarah studied the readouts Scout had generated. This isn't random button pushing. It understands the underlying principles of our technology well enough to optimize it. Scout seemed to recognize they were talking about its abilities. It approached Sarah's workstation and activated the holographic display, showing a complex three-dimensional diagram that took her a moment to recognize as a representation of the ship's computer network. "You're showing us how you see our systems," Sarah realized. "It's not just copying our button presses. You actually understand the data flow." Scout nodded and manipulated the display to highlight certain pathways. The image that emerged looked remarkably like a neural network, with data flowing like thoughts through synapses. To Scout, the ship's computer wasn't just a machine, it was a form of artificial mind. Martinez whistled softly. No wonder the other species never figured out how smart it is. They were looking for intelligence that works like theirs, not intelligence that works with technology as if it's alive. Over the following days, Scout became increasingly communicative. It had learned to modulate the pitch and rhythm of its trilling sounds to convey basic concepts like agreement, curiosity, warning, and gratitude. More importantly, it had begun using the ship's displays to show them images and concepts too complex for simple vocalizations. One evening, as they were sharing dinner in the small galley, Scout activated a wall display and showed them something that fundamentally changed their understanding of the situation. The image was of Earth. "That's home," Sarah said softly, pointing at the familiar blue marble. "How do you know about Earth?" Scout manipulated the display to show a timeline stretching back several decades. Earth appeared at one end, and Scout's home world at the other. Between them was a complex web of connections showing trade routes, communication signals, and what appeared to be diplomatic contact attempts. "Your people have been trying to contact Earth," Martinez realized. "For how long?" Scout showed them dates and duration markers. The attempts had been going on for nearly 40 years, following patterns that suggested systematic exploration and careful, non-intrusive observation. "They'd been watching us," Sarah said, but without alarm. The images Scout displayed showed careful, respectful observation from a distance. No infiltration, no interference, just patient study of humanity's development. Scout then showed them something even more remarkable. The images depicted other species that Scout's people had made contact with, the Corbins, Centauri, Hegemony, and others. In each case, the pattern was similar: careful observation, attempted communication, and, ultimately, disappointment. "They tried to make contact with all the major galactic civilizations," Sarah interpreted. "But something went wrong each time." Scout's scale shifted to somber shades of blue and gray as it showed them why. The other species had responded to contact attempts with suspicion, demands for technological secrets, or attempts to claim Scout's people as protectorates or subjects. "They wanted to control you," Martinez said angrily. "Your people offered friendship, and everyone else wanted domination."
Scout nodded sadly, then showed them the consequence.
Scout's people had withdrawn from galactic civilization, becoming isolated and hidden. The only evidence of their existence was a few individuals like Scout who had been captured during scientific expeditions or exploration missions.
That's how you got caught, Sarah realized. You were probably part of an observation mission that got too close to someone's territory.
Scout confirmed this with another image series showing a small ship being captured by Corvin patrol vessels. The rest of its crew had been imprisoned as illegal aliens, while Scout had been classified as an exotic animal due to its size and non-humanoid appearance. And, for 7 years, you've been passed around like cargo while your people think you're dead, Sarah said, feeling sick at the injustice of it all. But, Scout showed them one more image that changed everything. It was a recent star map showing dozens of small ships spreading out from Scout's home system and expanding search patterns. The rescue missions were still ongoing, reaching farther into space each year. They never gave up looking for you, Martinez said with obvious admiration. 7 years, and they're still searching.
Scout's scales brightened to warm golds and greens as it nodded.
Then, it showed them something that made Sarah's heart skip a beat.
Among the search ships was one heading directly toward known human space.
They're coming to Earth, she whispered.
When? The timeline Scout displayed suggested the ship would reach Earth's solar system within the next few months.
It would be humanity's first official contact with an advanced alien species, and it would be a species looking for one of their own who had been enslaved and abused by the galaxy's civilized races.
We have to get you home before then, Sarah said urgently. If your people arrive at Earth not knowing what happened to you, if they think humans might be responsible for your disappearance. Scout seemed to understand the implications.
It quickly manipulated the display to show detailed star charts, highlighting the fastest route to its home system. According to its calculations, they could reach Scout's world just barely ahead of the rescue ship's arrival at Earth.
It'll be close, Martinez said, studying the navigational requirements. We'll have to push the engines harder than recommended, and our fuel reserves will be cutting it tight.
Then, we push the engines and manage the fuel, Sarah decided.
We're not letting first contact between humans and Scout's people happen under a cloud of suspicion and grief. Scout's response was immediate and touching.
It gathered several of its belongings from around the ship and presented them to Sarah and Martinez. The items appeared to be personal mementos, small devices that projected images of its home world, what might have been family recordings, and objects whose significance was unclear but obviously meaningful.
You're giving us gifts, Sarah realized. But, Scout, these are precious to you. They're all you have left of home.
Scout made a complex series of sounds that somehow conveyed the concept that they weren't losing these items, they were sharing them. It wanted the humans to understand not just where it came from, but who its people were. The gifts revealed a civilization that was both highly advanced and deeply spiritual. The image projectors showed cities that existed in harmony with their environment, technology that enhanced rather than dominated nature, and beings who seemed to live in genuine peace with each other and their world. They're not just technologically advanced, Martinez observed as he examined one of the devices. Look at this. The technology is grown, not manufactured.
Living technology.
Scout confirmed this, showing them how its people's tools and machines were cultivated like plants, bred like animals, and nurtured into existence rather than built. It was an approach to technology that was completely alien to every other species they'd encountered, which probably explained why the galactic community had failed so completely to understand Scout's capabilities. As they continued toward Scout's home system, the creature became increasingly animated. Its scales displayed brighter, more complex patterns, and its trilling sounds became more musical and varied. It was clearly looking forward to being reunited with its people, but Sarah noticed it also seemed anxious about something. One evening, Scout approached her with a display showing what appeared to be a formal presentation or ceremony. Figures that looked like Scout stood before a larger group, making some kind of report or testimony. You're worried about what you'll tell them when you get home, Sarah interpreted.
About what happened to you out here? Scout nodded, its scales showing troubled patterns.
It manipulated the display to show images of the various species that had owned it, focusing on their treatment and the casual cruelty of its captivity. You're afraid your people will lose faith in the possibility of peaceful contact with other species, Sarah realized. You don't want your experience to poison their view of the galactic community. This was exactly Scout's concern. It showed her images of its people's careful, hopeful attempts at contact over the decades, and, then, the crushing disappointment each time those attempts failed or resulted in exploitation. "But, you met us," Martinez pointed out.
"That has to count for something."
Scout's scales brightened somewhat, and it showed them new images, humans working alongside Scout's people, sharing technology and knowledge, exploring the galaxy together as equals rather than as masters and subjects. "You see a future where our species can be friends," Sarah said.
"Real friends, not owners and pets." Scout nodded enthusiastically, then showed them something even more remarkable.
It was a vision of the galactic community as it could be, with Scout's people serving as bridges between different species, translating not just languages but fundamental ways of thinking and being. Your people could teach the galaxy how to really communicate with each other, Sarah realized. How to see intelligence and worth in beings that think differently than you do. This was apparently exactly what Scout hoped for. It showed them images of hybrid technologies that combined the best aspects of different species approaches, cities where multiple alien races lived together in genuine harmony, and exploration missions where diverse crews used their different strengths to achieve things none could accomplish alone.
"But, first, we have to get you home," Sarah said practically.
"And, we have to hope your people are willing to give the rest of the galaxy another chance."
The final week of their journey was tense.
The Windcatcher's engines were running at maximum sustainable power, their fuel reserves dwindling exactly as Martinez's calculations had predicted. Scout had taken to spending long periods interfacing with the ship's navigation systems, apparently fine-tuning their course for maximum efficiency. "I think it's actually improving our engine performance," Martinez reported after one of these sessions.
"Fuel consumption is down 3% from my estimates."
Scout was optimizing their flight path in real time, taking advantage of gravitational assists and stellar phenomena that weren't in the ship's standard navigation database. It was piloting skills that spoke of intimate familiarity with this region of space.
"We're getting close to your territory, aren't we?" Sarah asked.
Scout confirmed this by showing her sensor readings that had been meaningless to human instruments but apparently contained clear identifying markers to someone who knew what to look for. They were approaching the edge of space controlled by Scout's people.
"What happens now? Do we just fly into their system and hope they don't shoot first and ask questions later?" Scout actually made a sound that Sarah could only interpret as laughter.
It showed her images of its people's defensive capabilities, which were impressive but clearly designed for protection rather than aggression. More importantly, it revealed that they had been monitoring the Windcatcher's approach for the past 2 days. "They already know we're coming," Sarah realized.
"And they know you're aboard." Scout nodded and activated the ship's communication system.
Instead of sending out a standard hailing signal, it began transmitting a complex pattern of tones and data bursts that was clearly a form of communication far more sophisticated than basic radio. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The ship's displays lit up with incoming signals that Scout began translating into visual images.
What Sarah saw took her breath away. Dozens of ships were converging on their position, not to intercept them but to escort them home.
The vessels were unlike anything she'd ever seen, organic-looking craft that seemed to flow through space rather than simply traveling through it. They moved in perfect coordination, like schools of fish or flocks of birds. But, more importantly, the messages they were sending weren't demands for identification or statements of territorial warning. They were songs of welcome, expressions of joy, and what could only be described as tears of relief translated into light and sound. "They missed you," Sarah said softly, watching Scout's scales cycle through patterns of happiness so bright they were almost blinding. "They really, truly missed you." Scout made a sound that was pure music, a harmony of grief and joy and hope that needed no translation. It touched Sarah's hand gently, then Martinez's, in a gesture of gratitude that encompassed everything they had done and everything it meant. As the escort ships guided them toward Scout's home world, Sarah found herself thinking about what this moment meant. They weren't just returning a lost individual to its people, they were potentially opening the door to a new kind of relationship between species based on respect, understanding, and genuine friendship. The planet that appeared on their screens as they approached the system was everything Scout's projections had promised and more. It was a world where technology and nature existed in perfect harmony, where cities grew like living things and civilization enhanced rather than replaced the natural environment.
"Beautiful," Martinez breathed, staring at the sight. "It's absolutely beautiful." Scout's response was to show them that this was only the beginning.
If things went well, if the trust that had grown between them could be extended to their peoples, then this beautiful world might someday welcome human visitors as friends and equals. As landing coordinates were transmitted to their ship, Sarah realized they were about to make history. They were returning a lost child to its family, and, in doing so, they might just be starting the galaxy's first truly successful interspecies friendship. The windcatcher descended through clouds that seemed to part like curtains, toward a landing field where hundreds of beings waited to welcome their lost family member home. And, standing among them, Sarah could see, were figures that could only be Scout's actual family, their scales bright with joy and anticipation. "Welcome home, Scout," she whispered as the ship touched down gently on alien soil.
Welcome home.
The landing field was unlike anything Sarah had ever imagined. Instead of harsh metal and concrete, the ground beneath the windcatcher was composed of what appeared to be living crystal that shifted color in response to the ship's weight, distributing the pressure evenly while somehow communicating welcome through patterns of light. As the ship's systems powered down, Sarah watched through the viewports as hundreds of beings approached. They moved with a grace that spoke of deep harmony with their environment, their scales reflecting not just their emotions but, apparently picking up and amplifying the joy radiating from the gathered crowd. "They're all here for Scout," Martinez observed, his voice filled with wonder.
"Look at them.
It's like the whole planet stopped what they were doing to welcome one person home." Scout was pressed against the viewport, its scales cycling through patterns Sarah had never seen before, complex cascades of gold and silver and deep blue that seemed to tell entire stories in their shifting designs. The creature was practically vibrating with excitement, making soft musical sounds that harmonized with faint melodies drifting through the ship's communication system.
That's their welcome song, Sarah realized. The whole planet is singing.
The melody was hauntingly beautiful, composed of thousands of individual voices blending into harmonies that seemed to reach directly into the heart. It spoke of loss and searching, of hope maintained through dark times, and of joy beyond measure at finding what was thought lost forever. Scout turned to Sarah and Martinez, its large eyes bright with unshed tears. It made a sound that needed no translation, gratitude deeper than words could express.
Then, it did something unexpected.
It touched the ship's communication system and began adding its own voice to the planetary song. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The harmonies outside shifted and swelled as Scout's voice was recognized and welcomed back into the choir it had been separated from for 7 years. Sarah found herself crying without realizing it, moved by the sheer emotional power of a people welcoming home one of their own. "We should let you go to them," Sarah said softly, but Scout immediately showed distress at the suggestion. It activated a display showing images of Sarah and Martinez standing beside it as it was reunited with its family.
"You want us to come with you," Martinez interpreted. "You want to introduce us."
Scout nodded emphatically and showed them more images, humans and Scout's people working together, learning from each other, building something new and wonderful between their civilizations. It was clear that Scout saw this moment not as the end of its time with humans, but as the beginning of something much larger. The ship's external sensors detected a delegation approaching the boarding ramp. Unlike the enthusiastic crowd, these individuals moved with the measured dignity of formal representatives, though their scales showed warm patterns of welcome and curiosity. "Official welcoming committee," Sarah murmured, checking her appearance and wishing she had something more diplomatic than a worn salvage captain's uniform. Scout seemed to sense her nervousness. It projected an image showing how Scout's people would see her, not as a rough spacer in work clothes, but as the person who had rescued their lost family member and brought him home safely. To them, she would be a hero regardless of what she wore. The boarding ramp extended with a soft hiss, and the three of them walked down together into the crystal-clear air of Scout's world. The atmosphere was breathable for humans, though it carried scents unlike anything on Earth, floral notes combined with something like ozone and a subtle sweetness that might have been the planet's equivalent of chlorophyll. The delegation waiting for them was led by an individual whose scales displayed patterns of such complexity and beauty that Sarah initially mistook them for elaborate clothing. This being was clearly elderly, with scales that had taken on an almost crystalline quality with age, and eyes that held depths of wisdom and compassion. Scout immediately rushed to this individual, making sounds of pure joy while its scales displayed what could only be called a symphony of welcome. The elder's response was equally emotional, enveloping Scout in an embrace that somehow conveyed 7 years' worth of worry, love, and relief. Watching the reunion, Sarah finally understood something important about Scout's people. The individual patterns on their scales weren't just random colors, they were a form of communication as complex and nuanced as any spoken language. She had been watching Scout talk with its body this entire time without realizing it. After several minutes of what was clearly an intensely emotional reunion, the elder approached Sarah and Martinez. When it spoke, the words came not as sounds but as patterns of light projected into the air between them, which Scout immediately began translating into audible human speech. Elder Harmony Keeper greets the humans who brought young Startouched home to us, Scout translated, its own voice filled with pride. She says you have given our people a gift beyond measure, and asks how we can honor the courage and kindness you have shown. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the formal nature of the greeting. We were just doing what was right, she managed. Scout is a remarkable individual who deserved to be free. Scout translated her words, and the elder's scale pattern shifted to what could only be described as surprised delight. She projected another message, which Scout translated with obvious pleasure. Elder Harmony Keeper says that in 7 decades of attempted contact with other species, no one has ever described one of our people as remarkable or deserving of freedom. They have been called specimens, subjects, resources, even property, but never remarkable. The implications of this statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. You mean in all your attempts at contact, we're the first species to see Scout as a person rather than a thing? The crowd that had gathered around them responded with a wave of color that rippled through hundreds of individuals like a visual sigh of confirmation. These people had spent decades trying to make peaceful contact with galactic civilization, only to have their representatives treated as animals or curiosities. Martinez stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. That's not who we are. Humans aren't perfect, but we believe that any being capable of thought and feeling deserves respect and dignity. This statement caused an even more dramatic response from the gathered crowd. Scale patterns shifted to brilliant golds and whites, and the planetary song that had been playing softly in the background swelled to a crescendo of hope and joy. Scout turned to Sarah and Martinez with scales so bright they were almost blinding. It projected images showing not just its gratitude to them personally, but its people's growing hope that humanity might be the species they had been searching for, one capable of true interspecies friendship. Elder Harmony Keeper approached closer, her ancient eyes studying the humans with careful attention. When she spoke again, Scout's translation carried a weight of significance that made Sarah's heart race. She says that Startouched has shared with them everything that happened during the 7 years of captivity. The cruelty, the indifference, the treatment as property by supposedly advanced civilizations. But Startouched also shared something else, the moment when humans saw past appearances and recognized a thinking, feeling being in need of help. The elder's patterns shifted to deep, serious blues and purples. She asks if this compassion is truly representative of humanity, or if you too are exceptions among your people. Sarah felt the weight of her species' reputation resting on her answer. We'd like to think it's representative, she said carefully. Humans have made mistakes in our history, but we've also shown we can learn and grow. Most humans I know would have done exactly what we did if they'd found Scout in that container. Scout's translation of her words caused another wave of hopeful colors through the crowd. Elder Harmony Keeper considered this for a long moment before projecting her next message. She wants to test this theory, Scout translated, its voice carrying excitement and nervousness in equal measure. She wants to invite humanity to formal first contact. But what about your rescue ship heading for Earth? Martinez asked. According to Scout's projections, they should arrive in human space within weeks. This question caused a flurry of rapid communication among the delegation, scale patterns shifting so quickly that even Scout had trouble keeping up with the translation. Finally, Elder Harmony Keeper projected a longer, more complex message. The rescue ship was sent to search for any trace of Startouched, Scout translated. But it was also equipped for potential first contact if they encountered a species worth making contact with. Elder Harmony Keeper wants to send a message to the rescue ship, telling them what happened and inviting them to approach Earth as friends rather than desperate searchers. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. They were talking about fundamentally changing the nature of humanity's first contact with an advanced alien species. Instead of meeting desperate people searching for their lost family member, humans would meet explorers interested in friendship and cooperation. There's something else, Scout continued, its patterns showing nervous excitement. Elder Harmony Keeper wants to offer Startouched the choice to return to Earth with you as an ambassador, if that is something Startouched desires and if humanity would welcome such a representative. The offer hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. Scout could come home with them, not as a rescued pet but as an official representative of its people. The first alien ambassador to humanity.
Scout's response was immediate and enthusiastic.
Its scales blazed with patterns that needed no translation. It wanted nothing more than to help build a bridge between its people and humanity.
But first, Elder Harmony Keeper's next message came through Scout's translation. We must understand more about human civilization.
StarTouched has shown us glimpses, but we need to know if humanity as a whole is ready for true interspecies cooperation. What followed was the most extraordinary conversation Sarah had ever experienced.
The gathered crowd didn't disperse. Instead, they settled in for what was clearly going to be a long discussion.
Comfortable seating grew from the crystalline ground like living furniture, and refreshments appeared that were not only safe for human consumption but surprisingly delicious. For hours, Sarah and Martinez found themselves describing human civilization to hundreds of fascinated listeners. They talked about Earth's diversity, about the struggles humanity had faced in learning to live in peace with different cultures and ideologies within their own species.
Scout served as both translator and cultural interpreter, helping bridge the gaps in understanding when concepts didn't translate directly.
The conversation covered everything from human art and music to politics and philosophy, from scientific achievements to social progress.
What amazed Sarah was how genuinely curious Scout's people were about humanity's flaws as well as its strengths.
They asked thoughtful questions about human conflicts, about inequality and injustice, about the mistakes humanity had made and how they had tried to learn from them. You're not looking for a perfect species, Sarah realized during a pause in the questioning. You're looking for one capable of growth. Elder Harmony Keeper's pattern shifted to warm approval. Perfect species do not exist, Scout translated her response. But species that can learn, change, and grow together, these are the ones worth knowing. As the day wore on, Sarah began to understand the true scope of what Scout's people were offering.
They weren't just proposing trade relations or scientific exchange.
They were talking about genuine partnership, about sharing not just technology but wisdom, culture, and perspective. The conversation eventually turned to practical matters.
How would first contact be managed? What safeguards would be needed to protect both species? How would they deal with the other galactic civilizations that had already proven themselves untrustworthy? Scout's people had clearly given these questions much thought over their decades of attempted contact.
They proposed a gradual introduction, starting with limited contact between small groups and building trust slowly over time. They had technologies that could help, translation systems far more sophisticated than anything currently available, communication methods that conveyed emotional context along with words, even ways of sharing experiences directly between different types of minds. We could actually understand each other, Martinez said in wonder as Scout demonstrated a device that allowed him to briefly experience how the world looked through Scout's complex visual system. Not just translate words, but truly understand different ways of thinking. As the twin suns of Scout's world began to set, painting the crystal landscape in brilliant shades of gold and amber, Elder Harmony Keeper made one final, crucial offer. She says that if humanity agrees to formal contact, Scout's people will share something with us that they have never offered to any other species, Scout translated, its own excitement evident in its brightening scales.
What is that? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew.
The locations of other species like ourselves, civilizations that have been overlooked or dismissed by the galactic community because they don't fit standard patterns. Intelligent beings who have been classified as primitive or irrelevant because they think differently than the dominant cultures.
The implications were staggering.
Scout's people had apparently spent their years of isolation mapping and cataloging overlooked civilizations throughout the galaxy. They were offering to introduce humanity not just to themselves, but to an entire network of species that had been excluded from galactic society. A community of the underestimated, Sarah breathed. Species that the galaxy wrote off, coming together to prove that intelligence and worth common forms the establishment never expected.
Scout nodded enthusiastically, then showed them holographic images of some of these civilizations.
A species that communicated through controlled electromagnetic fields, dismissed as mere animals because they had no vocal cords. A race of living crystals that had been classified as minerals because they moved and grew slowly. Aquatic beings whose complex social structures had been ignored because land-based species couldn't imagine intelligence that thought in 3 dimensions plus time. We could be the first to recognize all of them, Martinez said softly. The first to see them as they really are. As night fell over the Crystal City, Sarah found herself making perhaps the most important decision in human history. Elder Harmony Keeper was waiting for an answer, and Scout was looking at her with hope and trust that transcended species barriers.
Yes, she said finally. On behalf of humanity, yes. We want to learn from you, to grow with you, and to help build something better than what the galaxy has seen before. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The entire city erupted in patterns of light and music that spoke of joy beyond words. Scout's scales blazed so brightly that Sarah had to shield her eyes, while the creature made sounds of pure happiness that needed no translation. But, even as they celebrated this historic agreement, Sarah knew the real work was just beginning. They had to get back to Earth ahead of the rescue ship, had to prepare humanity for the most important first contact in their species' history, and had to somehow convince their own people that this opportunity was worth the risks it entailed. Scout seemed to sense her thoughts. It approached her as the celebration continued around them and projected one final image: humans and Scout's people working side by side, exploring the galaxy together, bringing hope and recognition to species that had been forgotten or dismissed. It was a vision of the future worth fighting for, and Sarah was determined to make it real. The journey back to Earth was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The Windcatcher had been fitted with technology that Scout's people called harmony drives, propulsion systems that worked with spacetime rather than fighting against it. What should have been a month-long journey was completed in just over a week. But the real difference wasn't the speed. It was having Scout aboard as an official ambassador rather than a rescued victim. The creature, Sarah still had trouble thinking of Scout as anything but a friend, despite its official status, had been equipped with translation devices that made communication nearly seamless, and, more importantly, with the authority to speak for its people in initial negotiations. I still can't believe we're doing this, Martinez said as they approached the outer edge of the solar system. 6 months ago we were simple salvage operators. Now we're conducting first contact diplomacy. Scout's response came through the new translation system in a voice that somehow maintained the musical qualities of its natural speech while being perfectly understandable. You were never simple anything, Martinez friend. Your actions revealed the content of your hearts, and it was that content that made you suitable for this role. The approach to Earth had been carefully planned. Scout's people had provided detailed instructions on how to contact Earth authorities without causing panic, and they had sent ahead a probe containing their formal request for peaceful contact along with a complete record of Scout's experiences over the past 7 years. The timing worked out perfectly, Sarah noted as she reviewed the latest communications from Earth. The rescue ship arrived at the outer system just 3 days ago. Instead of finding a lost family member, they found a formal invitation to friendship. The response from Earth had been swift and overwhelmingly positive. The United Earth Council had immediately agreed to formal first contact protocols, and preparations were already underway for a historic meeting at Luna Station, humanity's primary orbital facility. But, more than official protocols, what struck Sarah was the personal message she'd received from Earth's First Contact Committee. They specifically thanked her and Martinez for their exemplary demonstration of human values in action and credited their treatment of Scout with making peaceful contact possible. We're heroes, Martinez said with a grin, though Sarah could tell he was as uncomfortable with the title as she was. Who would have thought? Not heroes, Scout corrected gently. Friends. The first real friends my people have found among the stars. That is worth more than any heroism. As Luna Station came into view, Sarah felt a familiar nervousness. This wasn't just about the historic meeting taking place, it was about whether the connection between humans and Scout's people could survive the transition from personal friendship to official diplomacy. The station was bustling with activity unlike anything in its history. Delegations from every major Earth nation had assembled, along with scientists, linguists, anthropologists, and diplomats. Media crews from across the system were documenting every moment of humanity's first official contact with an advanced alien civilization. But what struck Sarah most was the genuine excitement and hope she could see on every face. This wasn't fear or suspicion, it was eager anticipation of meeting new friends. Your people are ready for this, Scout observed, its scales shifting to patterns of pleased surprise as they docked at the station. I can sense their emotional resonance even through the ship's hull. They are approaching us with open hearts. The welcoming ceremony at Luna Station exceeded even Scout's expectations. Instead of the formal, sterile diplomatic reception that had been planned, the human organizers had created something that was part celebration, part cultural exchange, and part family reunion. Representatives from Scout's people had been given space to create a small environment that mimicked their homeworld, complete with living crystal surfaces and harmonious light displays. Meanwhile, humans had prepared exhibits showcasing Earth's diversity of cultures, arts, and expressions of welcome.
But, the most moving moment came when Scout was reunited with its family members who had arrived aboard the rescue ship. Sarah watched through tears as generations of Scout's relatives surrounded their lost family member, their scales creating a symphony of light that spoke of years of grief finally transformed into joy.
"We never lost hope," one of Scout's relatives told Sarah through the translation system.
Star-touched, Scout, as you call them, was always the most curious of our young ones, always wanting to explore and understand. When they disappeared, we knew they would find a way to survive and, eventually return home.
We just never imagined they would return with new friends. The formal negotiations proceeded with remarkable smoothness.
Both species approached the discussions with genuine goodwill and a shared desire to build something lasting and beneficial.
Trade agreements were established, scientific exchange programs were outlined, and cultural ambassador programs were planned.
But, more importantly, Scout's people shared their knowledge of the hidden civilizations scattered throughout the galaxy, species that had been overlooked, dismissed, or misunderstood by the dominant galactic powers. "We're not just making contact with one new species," explained Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Earth's lead xenobiologist, during a press briefing. "We're being introduced to an entire community of civilizations that have been waiting for someone to see their true worth and intelligence." The first of these introductions came sooner than anyone expected.
3 days into the formal negotiations, sensors detected an approaching ship unlike anything in the database.
It was massive but moved with an organic fluidity that spoke of living technology.
"The crystal speakers have come," Scout's family representative explained, their scales bright with excitement.
"They are one of our oldest friends among the overlooked peoples. When they heard about the humans who recognized Star-Touched's worth, they decided they must meet you for themselves." The crystal speakers turned out to be the living crystal beings that Sarah had seen in Scout's earlier projections. They communicated through harmonic resonances that had been dismissed by other species as geological noise, but which Scout's people had recognized decades ago as complex philosophical discussions about the nature of existence. Meeting them was an experience that fundamentally changed humanity's understanding of what intelligence could be. These beings thought in geological time, their conversations spanning decades, their memories stretching back millions of years. They had watched the rise and fall of civilizations while remaining still and patient, dismissed as lifeless minerals by species too short-lived to recognize their true nature.
"We greet the quick thoughts who see with clear vision," the crystal speaker's message resonated through Luna Station, translated by Scout's people into something humans could comprehend.
"Long have we waited for such recognition. Your friend Star-Touched has spoken truly of your people's wisdom." What followed was a week of the most extraordinary diplomatic activity in human history. More ships arrived daily, each carrying representatives of species that had been excluded from galactic society for various reasons. The electromagnetic communicators. The hive minds that other species couldn't understand were actually composed of billions of individual consciousnesses working in harmony. The phase-shifted beings that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions other species couldn't perceive. Each meeting was a revelation, each contact a refutation of the narrow definitions of intelligence and civilization that the established galactic powers had enforced for millennia. "It's like discovering that the galaxy is full of geniuses who were never allowed to speak," Martinez observed during one of their rare quiet moments. "How many breakthroughs, how many solutions to universal problems, have been lost because the major species couldn't see past their own limitations?" Scout, now serving as the primary liaison between humanity and this growing coalition of overlooked species, was practically glowing with happiness. "This is what we dreamed of for so long," it told Sarah. "Not just contact, but true understanding. Not just recognition, but genuine friendship between different forms of consciousness." The transformation in Scout itself had been remarkable to watch. No longer the frightened, malnourished creature they had found in a salvage container, it had grown into a confident ambassador bridging multiple worlds. But, more than that, it had retained the gentleness and curiosity that had made Sarah fall in love with it in the first place. "I have a question for you," Sarah said to Scout as they watched the latest arrival, a ship crewed by beings that existed as organized energy patterns and had been classified as natural phenomena by galactic science for centuries. "Always, Sarah friend. What troubles you? You could have chosen to stay with your people when we brought you home. You had every right to want nothing more to do with aliens after what you'd been through. Why did you choose to come back and serve as an ambassador?" Scout's scale shifted to deep, thoughtful patterns as it considered the question. "Because of something you taught me during our journey together. You showed me that the actions of some individuals do not define the worth of their entire species. The Corvins who enslaved me were cruel, but that does not mean all Corvins are cruel. The Centauri who used me for entertainment were shallow, but that does not mean their entire species is incapable of depth. Scout paused, its patterns shifting to warm golds and ambers. If I had allowed the cruelty of some to close my heart to the possibility of finding good in others, I would never have experienced the kindness you and Martinez showed me. I would have missed the greatest friendship of my life. Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes.
So you're giving the galaxy another chance?
I am giving the galaxy what you and your people have given me, the opportunity to prove that they can be better than their worst representatives. And, with humanity's help, perhaps we can create something new. A galactic community based on recognition of worth rather than similarity, on friendship rather than domination. The weeks that followed became known in history books as the Great Recognition, a period when humanity served as the catalyst for bringing together dozens of previously overlooked species into a new kind of galactic civilization. The established powers, the Corvins, Centauri, Hegemony, and others, initially responded with suspicion and, then, alarm as they realized that the primitive species they had dismissed were actually far more advanced than they had imagined. Some attempted to claim credit for discovering these civilizations, while others demanded access to their technologies and knowledge. But, the new coalition, with humanity as its diplomatic voice and Scouts people as its cultural bridge, had learned from history. They approached the established species with the same patience and open-mindedness they had shown each other, but they made it clear that any future relationships would be based on equality and mutual respect.
We don't seek to exclude anyone, Sarah explained during a Galactic Council session that was broadcast across known space.
But we also won't accept the old hierarchies that classified beings as superior or inferior based on superficial characteristics. If the established galactic species want to join this new community, they're welcome, but they have to earn their place through their actions, not claim it through their power. Some species rose to the challenge. The Corvin Syndicate, after much soul-searching, issued a formal apology for their treatment of beings they had classified as property and began the long process of making amends. Several Centauri colonies abandoned their old empire to join the new coalition, bringing with them remarkable innovations in art and culture that had been suppressed by their hierarchical society. Others refused to change and found themselves increasingly isolated as their former subjects and trading partners discovered alternatives that treated them with dignity and respect. But, perhaps the most satisfying development was the rescue of others who had suffered as Scout had. Using the coalition's combined knowledge and resources, they identified and liberated hundreds of intelligent beings who had been enslaved, imprisoned, or abandoned throughout the galaxy. Each rescue was a vindication of the principle that had started it all, that every thinking being deserved recognition, respect, and the chance to live freely among those who valued them for who they truly were. 1 year after their first meeting in the cargo hold of the Windcatcher, Sarah stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, humanity's new joint facility with the coalition species. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see ships from dozens of worlds arriving and departing, carrying not just cargo and passengers but ideas, art, scientific discoveries, and the ongoing conversations that were building a new kind of galactic civilization. Scout approached her, its scales displaying the complex patterns that she had learned indicated deep contentment mixed with excited anticipation.
"What are you thinking about, my friend?"
Scout asked. "I was remembering that first day," Sarah replied. "When we found you in that container, scared and alone.
Did you ever imagine it would lead to all this?" Scout's pattern shifted to what Sarah now recognized as gentle amusement.
"I hoped for rescue. I dreamed of going home. But this." Scout gestured toward the bustling space around them. "This is beyond anything I could have imagined."
"Do you think we'll succeed? This new community we're building? Look around you, Sarah friend. We have already succeeded.
Every being here is living proof that intelligence and worth come in forms the galaxy never expected. Every friendship formed across species lines is a victory over the narrow thinking that kept us apart for so long." Sarah nodded, watching as a young human child played a game with 3 different alien species, their laughter, in 4 completely different forms of expression, harmonizing into something beautiful and joyful. Besides, Scout added with patterns that definitely indicated mischief, "I have it on good authority that there are at least 12 more overlooked civilizations in unexplored sectors that we haven't contacted yet. Our work is far from finished." Sarah laughed, the same deep, warm sound that had first convinced Scout that humans might be different from the other species it had encountered. "Then, I guess we'd better get back to work. After all, there are more friends out there waiting to be found." As they walked back through Unity Station together, human and alien side by side as equals and friends, Sarah reflected on how a simple act of compassion toward one abandoned creature had led to the transformation of galactic civilization itself. Sometimes, she realized, the most profound changes began with the smallest acts of kindness. And, sometimes, the most important discoveries were not new technologies or distant worlds, but simply learning to see the worth and dignity that had been there all along, waiting for someone with the wisdom to recognize it. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders yet to be discovered. But, perhaps the greatest wonder of all was the simple truth that had started this entire adventure, that any being capable of thought and feeling deserved to be treated with respect, understanding, and friendship. It was a lesson that would echo across the stars for generations to come.